On this installment of the Pause series, we will explore deepening our connection to intuition. Hi, I'm your host, Lauren G. Koch, and you are listening to the Stop, Breathe, Feel, Create podcast. Something that we are encouraged to do from a young age is disconnect from our innate abilities as creators, healers, and intuitives. Much of my work is based on revealing the healer and creator inside of each of us and how we can learn to trust the inner knowing again. This inner knowing is what we call intuition. It takes place in silence and in the presence of inspiration that arrives from spirit, often by asking and waiting. It is the voice of understanding that translates messages from the soul level where divine truth, light, and wisdom can be heard. Have you ever just felt like something was off, that you shouldn't take your usual route home? That's what I'm talking about. That gut instinct, the inner knowing. Intuition does not need to be taught, it needs to be allowed. It is a capacity that has always been within us in a dormant state, waiting for us to turn toward it, like a flower turns to the sun. But fear, our inner critic, and societal programming can often get in the way of being as intuitive. But fear, our inner critic, and societal programming often get in the way of our intuitive nature. Intuition does not need to be taught. It needs to be allowed. It is a capacity that has been within us in a dormant state, waiting for us to turn inwards, like a flower turning towards the sun. But fear, our innate, but fear, our inner critic, and societal programming often gets in the way of being the intuitive being we're meant to be. These are my top 5 ways of building intuition. Take time for regular meditation. It's a way to clear the mind and make room for our intuition to shine through. And by meditation, I don't mean just sitting still and saying, I mean really turning inward. And this can be during walks, this can be during yoga, this can be by just sitting and being, but it can also be very creative. I do some of my best meditation work with a pen and pencil at my disposal. And a lot of times, meditation practices have to be created a little bit at a time. If you're expecting to just sit in silence for 15 minutes and you've never done it before, it can be very difficult. And I want to encourage you to try it. And it may not always look or feel the way that you think it should, especially coming from someone that, lives in a neurospicy world. My brain doesn't often shut down. And I've had to learn what works for me. And a lot of times when our brains are going 90 miles an hour and we have multiple voices constantly talking to us, it can be overwhelming. And being able to just sit and acknowledge the emotions, the uncomfortable feelings that pop up can really start to shift things, because a lot of times what we're doing is avoiding sitting in those emotions. If you do have inner critic that will not shut up, acknowledge it. Say, I acknowledge you. This can be in your inner voice, and just hold compassion for yourself. Say it's acknowledged and let it float away. If it's something that you need to take a note of, feel free to have a journal or something handy so that you can, but know that a lot of times you're just meant to download during this period of time. You're not meant to process. And so, if it is, oh yeah, I need to set my timer for the cake, or I have an appointment at 2 o'clock that I don't need to miss, definitely write those down. Or if you need to ask a question from someone that's really important, write it down. But otherwise, if it's just naggy inner critic stuff like, who are you to be doing this? Why are you doing this? This seems like a waste of time. You should be doing something more productive, blah, 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 blah. Acknowledge it, say, hey, thanks, and release it. Deepening your breath can help in that period of time. I really like starting and ending my meditation practice with like box breathing, where you're, breathing in for like 5 seconds, pause for 5, breathe out for 5, pause for 5, breathe in for 5, that sort of thing, that cyclical style of breathing. Next up, I would say record your dreams. You can't do that while you're experiencing them, right? So what do I mean? I mean, write them down, because they can provide useful information, because we often don't know how to process some emotions, and we often stuff them down because we're constantly moving. But the symbolism that we can see in our dreams, or the alternate realities that we move through during this period of time, can really give us some useful information in our day-to-day life. We experience multiple dream cycles during our sleep, and the trick is remembering them so that you can write them down. So keeping a journal on your bedside table can be useful, or something I like to do is grab my phone and open up the notes app. And so while I'm beginning my day, brushing my teeth, taking a bio break and stuff like that, I can quickly make notes. And it doesn't have to be the full out narration of what you experience. It can be key elements that really drew your attention. And if it's coming back time after time after time after time, you need to sort through what you're not addressing in your life. And through that, freeing your mind can also be a way to start allowing intuition to come into your life a little bit more. This is very simple. You're going to start finding ways and tasks that allow you to free your mind, allow it to meander. This could be taking a walk, driving, enjoying a shower, listening to nature sounds, even journaling, which is also one of the 5 tips. Because through journaling, you're able to free your mind because you're dumping all of the junk that has built up. And this is good before bed. This is good in the morning, especially you might have heard of Julia Cameron, The Artist Way. She talks about artist pages, and it is technically just stream of consciousness writing. And it allows you to get rid of all the gunk that you weren't able to release from the day before, or something that's been heavy on yourself, on your mind. And this will allow you to clear your subconscious to allow more things to download. So freeing your mind is really, really great. I find that some of my best processing time and intuition downloads is when I'm driving or taking a long shower. And then also while I'm meditating and journaling. Surprise, surprise. There's 2 of the things popping in. So keep those in mind. But the most simplest and yet often overlooked way to activate your intuition is to just use it. Start small. And these can be inconsequential things like asking your gut which direction to take time. and finally, on the 5 tips for developing intuition, the simplest yet most overlooked way of activating your intuition is to use it. Just use it. And this is by actually just starting to trust your intuition on small, inconsequential things like what direction to take when you're walking that day, or what podcast to listen to, or something like that. And the more that you get these intuitive hits to do something a certain way, you'll start to activate that feeling, that gut feeling that indicates that your intuition is talking, rather than the contraction that you feel when your inner critic is trying to go around and act like it's your intuition. So, two of the main things to keep in mind is when you're working with intuition, it feels like expansion. And when you're working with the inner critic, it feels like contraction. It feels like pain. It feels like you're trying to get away from something. And so they can often, especially in our nervous systems, we're so dysregulated that we often start to distrust our intuition, because it can often feel like the fluttery feeling of fear. Two things to keep in mind when we're talking about intuition and inner critic is intuition often feels like expansion. And that can come with its own amount of fear, right? Because things are actually going to change. But it's an expansive feeling rather than the fear that contracts you. And oftentimes, one of the things that I try to remember is when I'm fantasizing, rather than using my intuition, I don't feel that fear. It's because I know it's not really going to be real. I'm not going to act upon it. So that's not really there. And a lot of people often say that intuition's that yes feeling. It's not. It's not always that yes. It's often comes with, but what if this happens? But that's a big leap. I need support, that kind of thing. There's the same fluttery feeling of fear as when your inner critic is trying to keep you small. So it can often get sort of confusing at times, but the inner critic is contracting. It's playing into your fear. It's rolling all of those bad thoughts and negative conversations in your brain over and over and over again, taking up space. But with intuition and expansion, you're reaching out, you're taking the next step up that staircase toward living your most authentic and abundant life, right? And it is scary. It is scary when spirit starts asking you to do something that you don't feel like you're ready for, but there's still expansion there. So keep that in mind. When you're fantasizing about things that are not going to come to fruition, that you're not even going to get the ball rolling with manifesting, those are just going to feel sort of you're not really going to get much energy or inner dialogue from that. But with expansive, intuitive thoughts, you're going to get a lot of butterfly feelings, both from fear and excitement. So when we are experiencing such dysregulation in our bodies, in our nervous systems, we often can't distinguish between that inner critic fear that's like degrading us and telling us that we're not good enough and stuff like that, versus healthy fear, which is that excitement, that, but what if I do this and everything fails? That's okay. Sometimes we have to jump without the net, right? Sometimes we just have to trust and go with alignment. And that's the main thing, is when things are not in alignment, you're going to get a lot more of that inner critic. You're going to get a lot more of that fear of, I shouldn't be doing this. But the more you trust the intuition, the more you use the intuition, the more you're going to feel the excitement. So moving on, I want to leave you with a couple of things. During the February 2024 Living the Wheel of the Year episode, I mentioned mugwort as an awesome herb for connecting to intuition. Remember to use caution when using herbs topically or internally. And this goes for essential oils as well. And especially if you're breastfeeding or pregnant, please avoid using mugwort, especially. As far as essential oils for opening my third eye and connecting to spirit, I love blue tansy. It's actually a very potent blue dye. It's a natural colorant, and there's blue chamomile as well. They're in the same family, but they're very creative in opening herb. Frankincense and orange are also some of my favorites. As far as crystals for amplifying your intuition, labradorite and amethyst are two of my favorites. And of course, exploring tools traditionally used for divination, such as tarot, oracle, or archetype cards, runes, pendulums, elemental scrying, and even angelic light weaving can also help you connect to your soul on a deeper level and unpack things that may be a little too hard for you to interpret without visual assistance. The main thing is to connect to what feels right for you and your practice. We often get wrapped up in what we think something should feel or look like, that we don't always do what's best for our own mind, body, and spirit. You've been listening to a pause episode of the Stop, Breathe, Feel, Create podcast. In the show notes, you'll find details on how to connect with me to further support building your intuition. From events I'll be at to how you can work with me one-on-one to start living authentically and with abundance this year while deepening your connection to self and community through creativity, mindfulness, and nature. That's all for now. Tune in next time, and don't forget to check out Lauren G. Koch, Keeper of the Old Ways, across social media, as well as on YouTube and Patreon, where you'll be able to access even more inspiring and educational content. Plus, when you become a supporter, you also fuel the ongoing creation of content just like this. Many blessings, and don't forget to stop, breathe, feel, create.